Naked Story Chapter 1. The six of us had been planning this trip for almost a month, 3 couples, 3 motorcycles, and a secluded cabin on Lake Texoma. Dan and Robin inherited Robin's family cottage on the lake and invited all of us to live it up. We've been friends for a long time and have traveled to San Antonio and Vegas for weekends together. But this was different. 3 great days with the 6 of us. We expected to fish and sunbathe, but not much more than that. Just a long, relaxing weekend and a great way to start the summer. The temperature this weekend was supposed to be around 90 degrees, warmer than normal, and very welcome. Everyone met at our house, distributing gear for the trip. Dan had a beautiful Deuce soft tail. I had my baby. A 100th anniversary Fat Boy modified for about $600. Both bikes were great, attracted a lot of attention, but were somewhat limited in luggage capacity. Dan had just purchased a great biker's friend leather seat bag that attached to the back of the passenger footrest. Jack had a custom Road King that he had recently switched to, and by keeping our gear to an absolute minimum, we were able to load most of our stuff into his 2 saddlebags and Dan's new bag. I had a large gym bag strapped to the rear passenger seat that held drinks and a few towels to wrap them in. With such a small supply, we were limited to a couple shorts and t-shirts, a bathing suit, towels, and way too many toiletries. We had a decent amount of food, a few soft drinks, and a few more bottles of hard liquor stashed here and there. We were traveling light, but that should have been enough for the short time we were away. The trip was probably only about 100 miles or so by air, but the roads were a different matter. We had to drive through the backcountry of North Texas, cross a lake in Oklahoma near Cedar Mills, drive another hour on paved roads, and then pull onto a gravel and then dirt road leading to the old family estate. Robin's mother told us that her father built the original lake house, a true rustic cabin, in the middle of nowhere. After Lake Texoma was created by building a dam on the Red River, the 120+ acres of inaccessible hillside became a valuable commodity 30 years later. Most of the lake development has passed them by, and they are left with over 30 acres of land, including a cabin, dock, and swimming area. We had heard about this place for a long time, but had never been there. Of course, I was excited for any excuse to see the beautiful Jill and the stunning Robin in bikinis. I'm sure my companions were eagerly awaiting Sherry to enjoy her own bikini to the fullest, and yes, Jack's wife's name was Jill. Unfortunate, but none of the users were rude enough to make fun of it. It was a beautiful day for the trip, and the weather was expected to be good all weekend. There was a slight chance of rain on the first day, but clear skies were forecast thereafter. We had to leave early, by noon, to get settled in. An emergency call to Dan put us way behind schedule, as we had to wait for him to go to the office and come back. The ladies decided to have a little refreshment and had a blender of margaritas each, while Jack and I limited ourselves to 1 light beer. Riding the bike drunk was not the wisest decision. We eventually packed up and left the house a little late, but still managed to get on the road by 4 p.m. We had some minor traffic to overcome, and then everything should go smoothly. We would even be able to stop for lunch. I figured we would have plenty of daylight since the sun would set around 8 p.m. Emphasis on shall. We were going very fast and decided to stop for a bite to eat at a local diner, a favorite of Robin's family, where quite a few people had gathered. According to Dan, we were less than 10 miles from the turn-off, where our progress was going to slow down. We sat down to a delicious home-cooked meal, and after spreading out dinner and dessert, we figured we had about an hour of sunshine left. After paying the ridiculously reasonable bill and grabbing an ice pack, we headed out to wrap up our trip. As we were getting into our cars, I heard Dan yell, "Holy crap!" Turning toward him, it didn't take 10 seconds to see his problem. His new $250 seat bag was missing from his bike. Along with it, a third of our gear was missing. We quickly packed up and looked up at the darkening sky. It seemed that the clouds were coming just to make our day even better. It was decided to make a quick trip to the cabin and take inventory there. The next day, we could head out to replace everything we had lost. The missing gear gave us a chance to secure an ice bag. We had been traveling for about 5 minutes on the gravel road when the skies opened up. We were soon soaked through, but there was nowhere to stop, and with only a few miles to go, we decided to go ahead. We continued through the darkening evening and pulled onto a dirt road with about 2 miles to go. Of course, God in His infinite kindness decided it would be fun to give us one of His real downpours, and we crawled along at about 10 miles per hour, slipping on the mud and slippery grass, branches pulling at our sides, making our little trip a living hell on earth. We slowly made our way forward, Dan leading the way as he knew the unmarked road best, Jack following him, and Sherry and I riding behind, splattered with mud. In the light of Dan's headlights, it was nice to see the cabin appear. The setting sun and raging storm made it as dark as midnight. We quickly parked in the lot and took our gear off our bikes. Dan went behind the building and started the Honda generator to give us light. The doors were padlocked and the windows were closed to keep outsiders out. As Dan unlocked the side door, we all complained about our rotten luck. There's not much room inside, and we haven't been here since last year after Mom died. Robin informed us, we have bedding, towels, fishing gear, swimming gear, some dried and canned food. How about I bring some towels and we get rid of the wet clothes here and dry ourselves off so we don't stain everything around here. She barely had time to utter those words before we heard Dan yell out, "Damn it, shit, fuck, fuck." Dan is a short guy, about 180 centimeters tall, and is pretty quiet most of the time. He shaved his head to look a little older, which made him look like a short-cropped 8th grader. He almost never swore, but on this trip he was certainly making up for it. Looking past Robin, which was easy enough, she didn't even reach my chest. Someone had been to their cabin and left it in a different condition than they'd found it. There was only one light bulb working in the kitchen, but we all walked in following Robin to see the disaster. Our dampness and dirt couldn't make a difference. The vandals had broken a window on the far side of the cabin. There were beer cans everywhere, dirty sheets on the 2 beds, and water pouring through the broken window. Animals had been in the house. A dead bird lay in the corner with feathers scattered around it. Animal excrement was scattered all over the kitchen. In the living room, the couch was overturned, cushions scattered. I saw Jack turn and head back outside, and a few seconds later, he closed the shutters again, somehow sliding them shut and stopping the heavy downpour. You could feel the atmosphere of the place just sinking in. The mood was as gloomy as the sky. Our hopes for a fabulous weekend were washed away by the pouring rain. I walked over to one of the 2 looted closets and found a box of 4 17-watt fluorescent light bulbs on the top shelf. I went around and replaced the bulbs in 2 of the fixtures, but it didn't make the room look any better. We were all acting kind of lost when Jill started cleaning up. "Alex, are there any towels left in that closet?" On the middle shelf, there were several items of cloth of an indeterminate color. On the bottom shelf were garbage bags, paper towels, plastic utensils, and toilet paper. And on the floor were some cleaning supplies, a bucket, a broom, and a mop. I pulled out the basic cleaning supplies and set them aside, and then I started pulling out the contents of the towel shelf and found that we had at least 8 towels. They were mostly well-worn beach towels and a few hand towels as well. I unfolded and snapped each one, checking to see if there was anything alive in them. We were lucky in that matter. They were all in pretty good condition. On the next shelf, I found a change of white linens. There were some animal feces on the shelf, but the sheets themselves seemed to be intact. I gave those away as well. Everyone helped each other by sweeping, picking up trash, arranging furniture, wiping up excess water and mud, and doing whatever else was needed. When the worst of it was cleaned up, we noticed we were making less and less progress as we shoveled the dirt and water ourselves. No one wanted to walk on the wood floors as they were when we arrived, but after an hour of working together, the worst of it was eliminated. After that, the guys were taken outside to take off their wet clothes and dry off, and the girls were taken inside. It was a one-room cabin with a small bathroom, which had been added after the work was finished. It was a real rugged vacation. I crouched down and scraped the very mud off my boots with a stick in anticipation. They said they'd be here in a second, but this wasn't my first rodeo. The girls kept us outside for a while longer, while they scrubbed the floor once more and handed us their wet clothes. As I watched the girls' soaked panties walk out the door, vulgar thoughts began to visit me. I'm sure I wasn't alone. By the time we had stripped, dried off, hung up our clothes, and returned to the house in towels, we were in a slightly better mood. Dan said about stoking the 100-year-old stone fireplace as it started to get a little chilly outside. I started moving our gear into the kitchen, and Jack started cleaning up wherever he was assigned. I couldn't help but stare at our women. They were all dressed in nothing but a towel. Tiny Robin was well covered, her towel wrapped around her body and reaching almost to her knees. Sherry looked very seductive. She is the bustiest, and the towel was tight around her breasts, seemingly ready to burst open at any moment. Her outfit reached her butt at arm's length, and the guys were hoping and praying that she would bend over for a quick show. It was different with Jill. She was tall, almost 6 feet, taller than everyone but me. She had incredibly long legs, which was a blessing. If her legs had been shorter, we would have all gotten a performance all the time. In order for the towel to cover her intimate parts, she wore it lower on her chest than the other two. It seemed to barely cover her breasts. Even then, the towel barely covered her ass, and any casual movement gave us great hints of what was out of sight. Any random movement, like when she was flipping mattresses and cleaning them, shame on her. It was outright teasing, and it caused a tent to form on my towel. Watching Robin's movements, I wondered if anyone had told her that she had a large tear in her towel. It was a very strategic spot, a large triangular hole, at least 4 inches across, that exposed the oh-so-white skin of the left cheek of her ass. Apparently, God had compensated a little for that downpour. As Sherry moved to the shed to hang the wet clothes to dry, I couldn't help but notice Jack and Dan watching her closely. Every time she reached up to hang another item on the rack, you could see the bottom of her ass. Surely she knew what she was doing. Jack and Robin were going through our supplies when I heard Robin start to giggle almost hysterically. Of course, it had to happen on a day like this. "What?" asked Dan, stoking the fire to a bright flame. "Do you remember what we had in the saddlebag? A bunch of stuff," he replied. "No, we decided to put clothes in there since they're much easier to stuff." "All the clothes?" She laughed nervously. "What about Alex's bag?" Sherry asked. "Just a lot of booze wrapped in what were once paper bags and 2 soggy beach towels." Dan headed outside to try to find some more dry wood at the bottom of the wood pile. Some fucking vacation. I heard him mutter. The poor guy was having a bad day. First the emergency at work, then the expensive bag, then the rain, and now his cabin. In the garage, he told off and went behind the hut, naked as a jay-bird. When he returned with several pieces of firewood, he made a couple more runs and stacked a dry pile of firewood under the shed. I noticed what he was doing as I was constantly going in and out. I was tasked with taking out dirty bedding, 3 full trash bags, and broken glass from the window. Sherry came out to hang the wet towels from our bag. She kept her eyes on him as Dan finished his last hike. He looked like a drowned rat. Sorry, but I didn't want the only semi-dry thing I owned to get any wetter. He explained to my wife, and he turned his back to her, wiped himself off, and wrapped himself up again. Sherry laughed, oblivious to the situation, and taking it better than I could have hoped. "Don't worry about it. I have a feeling that by the end of this weekend, we're going to be seeing a lot more of each other than we expected." No one spoke truer words. When the trash was taken out, most of the room cleaned, the bathroom, kitchen, floor, and every surface we could reach wiped down, and the furniture arranged properly. It was hard to tell that this was the same place we had arrived at just a couple hours before. It was almost a miracle what 6 people could accomplish in less than 3 hours. The room was decently lit, smelled of Clorox and pine sol, which was much better than when we started. The front door led out onto a covered porch overlooking the water, 50 yards down the slope. The door was open, and the screen door closed to ventilate the room. All but the two front windows facing the porch were covered with shutters. We didn't have to get wet to open them, and we could even open the windows themselves with the screens in place. The storm outside had not abated, and there was no doubt that we would have to spend the night in this place. I finally looked it over carefully, paying attention to what we had, not what was wrong. The cabin was essentially divided into quarters. Upon entering through a side door to the left was the kitchen. It had a propane stove, an icebox, a simple sink, and some counters. A table with 6 chairs was also located here. The front door divided the front of the house into 2 parts: the kitchen and the recreation area. In the recreation area were 2 couches and a table framing a huge fireplace. At the back of the house were 2 double beds, several dressers, and a small but efficient bathroom. Dan was still upset. I don't understand this. They shouldn't have cluttered the place up. The truth is, it could have been much worse. I have houses that renters have left in much worse condition. Whoever was there broke a window, letting bad weather and animals in, left behind a pile of trash, but made no effort to do any damage to the home. They were just slobs. Outside, the storm was gaining strength, which also made no sense. The forecast was calling for showers. Damn meteorologists. Robin did her best to make the beds, with Jill's help, and complained bitterly that the home invaders had ripped off the curtains that separated the 2 beds and the back of the house from the front. As soon as she mentioned it, I looked up and saw evidence of missing curtains and broken walkways. Jill, on the other hand, was determined to make things as good as possible. Have Alex make sure we at least have tequila, vodka, and rum. I say we get bottles and just thank our stars that this place is still standing. What if they had burned it down or damaged the roof? We'd be in this mud, trying to get back to civilization. She waved a bottle of tequila, a salt shaker, and a squeezed lemon. What do you say, gang? Robin lowered himself onto the couch, the seat closest to the fire. Pass it over here. I definitely need a drink. The couches were arranged in a V shape, closer to the fireplace, and an arm's length away from the opposite end. Within seconds, we were all gathered in the lounge area, tired and ready for a breather, listening to the thunderstorm continue outside and maneuvering for a place to sit. I ended up next to Robin, and Sherry ended up next to me. On the other couch, Jack sat across from Robin, Dan across from Sherry, and Jill was firmly planted in the middle. I looked over at her, anticipating a great view, but she crossed her legs demurely. Robin sprinkled some salt on her hand, licked it, and sipped from the bottle. There was a look of amazement on her face. Wow, this is the best tequila I've ever had. I swear it looks like a single malt scotch. El Tesoro Inigo, it's been on my shelf for 3 years. It's not the best, but it's damn good, I informed her. The bottles circled the room, salt in front, tequila behind it, and squeezed lemon behind it. No sooner had it made a second lap than Jill was back on the case. It's really not that bad. I'm just thankful we have a roof over our heads. A conversation ensued, and it was decided that everyone should say what they were excited about on this trip. Dan held the bottle and was about to lick the salt off his hand. I'm glad only one window broke, and Jack was able to close it. He licked the salt off, took a sip from the bottle, and leaned over to hand it to Sherry, who had just handed the salt to me. When she leaned forward to pick up the bottle, her towel fell off, giving everyone paying attention, and Dan in particular, a full view of her breasts. She set the bottle on the table, reapplied her towel, and picked up the bottle again. "Didn't I tell you?" she said to Dan, who smiled at her. It was his first smile in a while. "Good thing we remembered to bring our drinks with us," she said, after which she took a healthy sip. In my part, it was simple enough. I'm glad that if we have to make the best of a bad situation, it's with you guys. It was true. Not only did I get along well with Jack and Dan, especially Dan, but I was always happy to be around their sexy wives. Robin greedily took the bottle without sprinkling salt on it. I'm glad I found out about this stuff. I swear I'll never drink Jose Cuervo again. She took a leisurely sip from the bottle. but then decided against it. As she bent over to pass the bottle, I got a good view of her backside. The towel was somehow tangled at the back of her waist. It was a very nice ass. Jack took his turn. "I'm glad we have clean, dry towels," he said, "and I hope we have more tequila. We've almost killed that soldier." I stood up, lifting the front of the towel slightly, and pulled out a second bottle of the same. I was a little surprised at how quickly we had dispensed with the first bottle. We only had 3 bottles of tequila, and from the way things were going, it looked like we might finish them all tonight. There was about 25 ounces in the bottle, and the crowd was taking healthy sips. Jill took the bottle from me. "I'm glad we have a fireplace," and Dan the man somehow found dry wood. When she turned to hand the bottle to Dan, I felt like shouting that I was glad her towel was too short. She had become much less feminine in the last few minutes in the way she sat, and it was clear from where I was sitting that she had shaved. "Good thing the stolen bag had our clothes in it, and not the liquor," said Dan, taking a long swig from the bottle. When Sherry reached for the bottle again, it once again spilled out of her pack. "Damn it, I need a bigger towel." "Not true," Dan laughed, causing everyone in the room to giggle. Jill elbowed him for good measure. Sherry stood up and defiantly threw back the towel just to her waist, leaving her magnificent breasts on display. "Damn it, I'm glad I'm with people who don't mind showing their breasts." She took a sip and handed me the bottle. I was almost in shock. I never, ever expected this from my dear wife. Not that she didn't like to walk naked around our house every chance she got, but she wasn't all that spectacular in appearance. Still, it was beyond what I could have expected based on the past. Looking around, I saw that the other guys probably hadn't expected it either, but were damn glad of it. Almost every eye in the room was fixed on my wife, including the ladies. I'm glad there are no animals living here," I said. "I'd hate to have to fight a family of raccoons for a spot." Robin stood up and dropped the towel around her waist. "I'm glad Sherry melted the ice. It's damn hot by the fire." Then she set to work on the bottle. When she was done, she set the bottle on the table instead of standing up. I tried not to stare, but how could I not? Robin's breasts were perfect. She was so small. The full melons on her chest seemed to defy gravity. Robin had an exotic appearance. I knew she was part Asian, I think Thai. I had dated her mother, who was half Asian, and she was much better looking. In Robin's case, it gave her a small, slender body, long, raven curls, and a devastatingly pretty face. She had a slight exotic cut to her eyes, but her nose was very Scandinavian, and her curves seemed completely American. She was the best of the lot. I liked her from the first time I met her. When she sat next to me nearly naked, and we were both half drunk, it was an almost unbearable temptation. I really wanted to use her for salty licking during the next shot. Jack stood up and picked up the bottle. "I'm glad the fire's hot," he said, winking at Robin. Jill took the bottle inside. "Oh well, how can I compete with that?" she asked, nodding at the 2 pairs of naked breasts. Robin immediately picked up the phone. "Face it, Jill, we have no clothes, no bathing suits, and I'm willing to bet the road won't be in any condition to go shopping tomorrow. We can't have any privacy in this one-room shack, and everyone here has already seen your lower half. Hell, Alex is getting a hell of a show right now. Just show us your boobs, it's just tits." "I'll be damned if the only people who show skin are women," Jill said. "Fuck it." She stood up, pulled off her towel, turned around, folded it, and bent over to put it on the couch where she was sitting. "I'm glad I've lost 14 pounds since February." Seeing her ass as she bent over, I was glad she decided to play this game. She was stunning. Jill had full natural breasts. She had lovely curves and just a hint of a tummy. Her shoulder-length brown hair was longer in the front and shorter in the back, where it usually curled toward her head. Today it hung straight down, curling slightly at the ends. She had the natural cuteness of a neighborhood girl, accentuated by a field of freckles around her nose and on her chest. I was hard as a rock and embarrassed that I would probably soon have to lose my towel as well. Dan stood up and told off, showing his growing arousal. "I'm glad everyone here is going to look damn good naked." He then looked at me. "Except Alex. Man, there's something wrong with a man shaving his chest." "I don't shave my chest," I objected. It's just that grass can't grow in the driveway. Sherry took the bottle from him, stood up and told off as well. Good thing I waxed this week. She had a very sexy Brazilian waxing. She took a sip and handed me the bottle, then folded the towel and put it under her. That little action ended the discussion between Dan and I. And no, I don't shave my chest. I stood up and threw the towel away. I was as solid as ever, and there was no denying that I was enjoying the sight. I'm sorry Dan lost his new saddlebag, but I'm even glad we lost our clothes. I took a sip and handed the bottle to Robin. Robin stood up, took off her towel, folded it in half, and put it back on the couch. Then she sat cross-legged and sipped her tequila. I'm glad we played the I'm glad game, but I'm ready for something else. Any suggestions? She then quickly stood up for a second. And by the way, I'm declaring this cabin an official no-clothes resort. Another conversation ensued, during which Jack finally stood up and told off. I feel stupid, the only one covered. We ended up taking turns talking about how unlucky we were, which resulted in some pretty funny stories. The bottle was again right next to us, with a lot of ogling and slurred words. When the bottle passed me, I thought it was only about 1/3 full. Robin insisted on another break. This time it was decided that we would take turns talking about our worst vacations. The table became much slower, and the atmosphere changed. The tequila was definitely working. Sherry snuggled up against me, and Jack had his hand between Jill's legs, lightly stroking the inside of her thigh. She spread her legs slightly and was visibly aroused. The only problem with our seating was that Dan and Robin were without a date. While Dan was telling an incoherent story, I decided to take the last bottle of tequila and let it go around, separately, since apparently the current bottle had gone stale and was being used as a spare. I was hard to the point of pain, and my little friend seemed to stick straight out into the center of the room, jerking and swaying as I walked. I expected to be teased, but I didn't hear a word from them. I couldn't help but notice that both Jill and Robin were watching my flagpole with inordinate interest, both leaving and returning. It was a little disconcerting. I know I look a little different than most guys, but no one said anything. When I sat back down and took a sip, Dan was still talking about how he got lost on vacation in junior high school. I handed the bottle to Robin. She looked at the other bottle, took a hesitant sip, then another. "Geez, Alex, you have great taste in alcohol. What is this?" she whispered to me as her half-drunk husband muttered something. I didn't want to upset him, but I don't think anyone was listening to him anymore. "Jose Cuervo, Reserva de la Familia. Change your mind about Jose?" I asked her softly. She leaned back in the corner of the couch, lifted her legs and placed them on my foot. "Jose Cuervo is my friend again." She took another sip and set the bottle on the table for Jack to retrieve. My hand rested carelessly on her naked thigh, and my erection threatened to spontaneously combust. Jack, meanwhile, was staring at my wife, leaning against me, the tequila thoroughly affecting her. I couldn't blame him. She was very sexy indeed. His hand moved higher between my wife's spread legs, and his own erection was quite visible. His eyes were closed, and his head was thrown back, and he was mumbling something that might have been his story. I couldn't tell, of course. My wife was lying almost in my lap. I put my arm around her shoulders, and one hand rested lightly on her breast. I felt a hand slide down my leg, and I almost passed out when she wrapped her fingers around me. Robin caught my attention by shifting her foot and leaning toward me. "Damn it, this isn't fair. I'm so fucking horny right now." She looked across the street at Dan, who was still leaning back, but his lips were no longer moving. I couldn't believe it, but he looked like he was asleep. Suddenly, Robin pulled my hand down between her legs and leaned back to watch my wife work her hands. God, it felt so good. In our 2 years of marriage, I had never touched another woman like that before. Across from me, Jill lay on her husband's lap with her eyes closed, while he fondled her with his fingers, all the while watching my wife. I decided I wasn't going to let too much tequila ruin what could have been an incredible weekend. I whispered regretfully to Robin, "I'd love to keep doing this and more, but not like this. It's not fair to Dan." I pulled Sherry away from me and stepped out of the crowd. I picked her up in my arms and carried her to one of the two available beds. "I want your buddy," she mumbled inaudibly. "I'd love to," I told her, climbing into bed with her. She moved over to the bed. A couple minutes later, I saw Robin pull her half-asleep husband into the bed next to us and tried to get him aroused. It distracted me from contemplating my own waistline. I was looking at an exotic beauty with her gorgeous body and profile, and her face tucked into his lap, and her hands hard at work. He never fully awoke, never had time to get up, and she finally turned away from him, lay on her side, and openly watched us. Our gazes met briefly. I admired her body some more, and then turned back to watch my naughty wife's actions. The other side of the cabin became noisy, and I could see Jack lying on top of Jill, the couch creaking merrily as he tried to push her across its bottom. Her periodic squeals sounded just wonderful. I glanced to the side and saw Robin, who was also watching the couch show. She turned to me abruptly, then came over and sat on the edge of our bed, watching my wife work. She played with herself and stretched out and lay on top of me. I, against my better judgment, put my arms around her. Sherry pulled away from my rod, pulled herself closer to me, and fell asleep on my shoulder. I relaxed into Dan's wife's arms around me, my hand wandering more than it should have. When she went lower, I realized I should have done something to stop it, but it felt so damn good. Feeling her breasts press against my side, I pulled her head back, leaned in and kissed her. It was long and tender, and I hardened in her hand. "Not like this," I told her quietly. "I want to. You know how much I want it, and how long I've wanted it, but not like this." She reluctantly let go of me, and I kissed her again and again and again. Somewhere during those kisses, I finally fell asleep. When I awoke and looked more closely, I saw that it was not my wife who was laboring over me, but Robin, who was demonstrating to me that she was no less talented at giving head, if not listening to common sense. We sat very quietly, and I noticed that the weather outside had almost completely subsided, and the fire in the fireplace was almost out. The room was noticeably cooler, but not for us. I fell asleep again, almost certain that it was a dream. I woke up slowly, sticky from the humidity and heat, my head splitting from the excess alcohol, and my mouth as dry as the Sahara. I heard voices nearby, and I pulled the pillow over my head to block out the angry light. "Looks like someone's waking up," I heard it uttered. "I wonder if his master is too. Chill, I heard my wife admonish her friend." I realized I had a bad case of morning wood, and without half a bottle of tequila in me, I was no longer the exhibitionist I had been the night before. I shifted the pillow from my head to my waist, which caused a lot of booing. Sitting and looking at the group I was entertaining, I was glad I had covered myself with a pillow. The sight alone was almost enough to push me over the edge. All three women were in the kitchen, and they were all topless, wearing towels around their waists and nothing. "Glurgog," I muttered. I didn't like mornings. Dan is clearing brush and mowing the grass between us and the water. Jack is scouring the area for our clothes, most of which the wind tore up last night and scattered over 30 acres. "Don't you have a clue?" replied Sherry, as if understanding my grumbling. Staggering, I got out of bed and headed for the bathroom, where I waited patiently for my erection to weaken enough for me to urinate through it. I read the sign above the toilet bowl reminding me, if the urine is yellow, let it get soft. If it's brown, flush it. Just below was a reminder that toilet paper and other paper items should not be put in the toilet bowl. Refusing my morning flush, I splashed water on my face, rinsed my mouth with someone else's mouthwash, shook the garbage out of my eyes, took 2 deep breaths, and stepped out to face the world. My staff was still half hard in appreciation of the scenery. You'd think he'd be in a better mood. God, how many years has he been looking at our boobs? And now that they're on display, he looks like the Grinch, said Jill, leaning back against the counter and crossing her arms, which put those luscious tits on display. "Look, you made him smile. He's alive," teased me, my surly wife. "Water, food." I grumbled and they laughed at my misfortune. You'd think he'd bounce off the walls. If I gave Dan one of those like Sherry did to this one, I'd probably buy myself a new convertible. chimed in Robin. If you got Jack one, I'm sure he'd buy it for you before I kicked his ass, teased Jill. Jesus, Robin, don't remind me. I was so drunk. Good tequila sneaks up unnoticed, Sherry pronounced. I'm not in the habit of doing that in public. Must be the damn tequila. Hey, men, I'm switching to rum tonight. Tequila makes my bottom hurt, Jill complained, almost choking on her saliva. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I had known these people for at least 3 years. Both women were participants in our wedding. I had never heard half as much sexy talk as I had in that kitchen before a stack of hotcakes was placed in front of me. Robin couldn't leave it at that. If you get as drunk tonight as you did yesterday, I'll be surprised if that's the only hole that hurts. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if it hurts at least twice as much, she said, nodding in my direction. We served honey to the hot scones, a strange combination in my opinion, but I was very hungry and it came in handy. What am I supposed to do this morning? I asked, slowly coming to my senses. I am, exclaimed Jill. No, me, objected Robin. I was still a little lethargic. I watched in awe as 2 gorgeous ladies competed for my attention. I felt myself responding to the idea. Lying boy, they're teasing you. Take a dip in the lake. You stink of alcohol. Then take a ride on the trail and see how bad it gets getting out of here, Sherry told me. I'm sure I was like a little boy who had his candy snatched out of his hand. Don't pout, Jill told me, moving behind me and leaning her breasts against my head. She gave my shoulders a light massage. Maybe when you get back, we'll let you put sunt and lotion on us all. Robin chuckled. Right, you've already promised that to both of the other men. Hey, Jill objected. First of all, there's 3 of us. And second of all, we need to cover up more than once a day. Don't you think? Really? Where's my towel? I asked, looking around. You snooze, you lose. They're limited in quantity, so we rinse them out a few at a time. Either way, you don't have to worry. Of course, your pants will be one of the ones that manage to stay in place. In any case, you don't want to be walking down the trail in just a towel, Sherry informed me. You don't need a towel to take a dip in the lake, Jill reminded me. So, stop staring and get busy, or we'll clean it all up. I turned on my heel and headed for the exit. Wait, I'll come with you. I need to check on Dan, Robin said, catching up with me. We saw Dan at work with a gasoline weed whacker at the waterline itself. The path down had a decent slope, but not enough to make it difficult to follow. The pathway was stone and looked as old as anything else, and as rugged. There was grass on either side of the path, real Bermuda grass for about 10 feet, and then a 5-foot section of regular dirt, and then more grass. It looked strange. Dan's doing it to keep everything else from getting overgrown with grass. I think it's overkill. He sprays a couple gallons of Roundup on it every couple months, all summer long. I think that can't be good for the environment. I'm not going to change his mind. He's the one doing the work, and the grass looks amazing. I stepped off the path onto the grass, which was soft and cool under my feet. Robin lowered himself down beside me. We walked a few paces in silence before she spoke. I'm sorry about last night, I laughed. No, it was stupid and wrong. The place and time were terrible. With the right circumstances, it could have been one of the most sensational events of my life. But hell, I'll take it as it comes and thank my lucky stars. You're so bad, she said, nudging me lightly with her shoulder. Look who's talking, hot lips. Stop it. You're embarrassing me. She turned away, and we walked slowly down the street. I don't want to do that. I want you to get horny like me, I teased. Her husband was only 40 meters away from me. Mission accomplished. I've been horny since I started walking around in just a towel, and I've been missing just one move to be completely naked in front of everyone. She paused in her walk and spun around for me. When I walk around with my tits bare, I feel like I'm begging everyone to fondle me and do business with me, she said as she turned back toward the lake. So, can we keep our little mistake last night a secret? She asked quietly, running toward where her husband was pulling tall weeds. I think so, I told her softly. I turned and went to the water while she stepped back to check on her hubby. That's good. I think that if I can trust you with one big secret, Then maybe in the future, I can trust you with more, maybe a lot more." And with those words, she turned and walked away. I walked out onto the dock and dove to the swim platform, located about 30 yards away. I used a light freestyle that easily parted the cool water, refreshing me and making me feel 100% better. When I reached the platform, I climbed up onto it and relaxed for a bit, enjoying the warm rays of the sun. It felt like it was already over 80 outside. I looked back at the cabin, standing picturesquely on the hill. Jill was standing on the porch, laying out towels on the railing to dry so they could soak up the sunlight. Looking down at the water's edge, I saw that Robin had entered the lake and was swimming toward me, switching easily to breaststroke. How apropos. She reached the platform and climbed the ladder to join me. "I have so many wonderful memories of this place growing up," she announced, shaking off her wet hair, and laid down on the wooden platform, basking in the sun. I admired the view. This terrain doesn't change. "It takes me back in time. I love it," she said with a sigh. "Did you know that it was here, on this platform, that I had my first kiss between a boy and a girl? It's beautiful, the scenery here is amazing." I was referring to both the natural scenery and the view a few inches away from me. "Are you always this tense?" she asked suddenly. "I'm not solid," I told her, but I was getting there. "I mean full and thick, half hard. You've been like this since I first saw you last night. You're either hard as a rock or on the verge, like you are now." She looked at my tense rod. "Okay, maybe not like now, but it looks like you're hard as a rock again." "Naughty boy. What did you expect speaking like that?" "Well, really," she insisted. "Now you're embarrassing me," I told her. "Let's get in the water," she said. "I want to hold him again. God, you're no good." "What if someone from the cabin is watching? What will they think if they see us out of sight together?" I asked, and glancing over my shoulder and making sure that no one was watching us, I entered the water, placing the platform between us and the cabin. "I know what they'll think," she giggled, and rightly so, "but they'll still let us have a few minutes together." She jumped up behind me. I lowered myself between her legs. We stood like that, holding onto the ladder with one hand, the other caressing each other, silent, savoring the moment. There were ladders at the front and back of the platform, and I used the back one. I threw my leg over the rung at the water's edge and grasped one of the platform's wooden cross beams and easily lifted my hips up. It was a small job, but not too difficult. She got right to work. It took some time to do it right, so as not to accidentally inhale a full face of water and to learn to resist the soft vibrations of the lake. It felt really good to watch it, and I relaxed. And after that, it was on to completion. "That was stupid of me," she sighed, leaning over to me and hugging me. "I'll want more." She glanced over my shoulder. "Shit, Jill and Shari are headed this way. They're already in the water." That was mean, I told her, to let a guy get so close and then leave him hanging. "I'll make it up to you," she teased, and then climbed the ladder back up to the platform. I kissed her sweet ass as she floated past me. "You're bad," she hissed before reaching out. I let the cool water relieve my hardest direction and climbed up onto the platform just as the other two had already approached. Jill couldn't help herself. "What have you been up to? You seem to have disappeared from sight for a while." "Checking the platform's fastenings. I have to do that every time we come here. I wouldn't want the platform to float away," she explained easily. You have more willpower than I do. If he was here alone, I'd have something to do besides checking ropes and stuff." Jill chuckled, settling down on the platform. With 4 of us, she was getting full. "You're so cocky," Shari told her. "Oh no, you don't. You have things to do before the game. If you don't get started, you won't be back in time for lunch, and that would be a real shame. I think you'll want to see what we have for lunch." She nodded toward the cabin. "Let's go. Before he goes," put in Jill. "Couldn't he oil us so we wouldn't burn?" Shari rolled her eyes. "Did you bring sunt and lotion in here?" Jill waved the bottle. "It's not that hard to swim with it." Then she looked at me. "And since I brought lotion, you can start with me." I looked at Shari, still not wanting to go too far. But she only rolled her eyes and then nodded her head to Jill, giving me permission. Only from behind, she warned me. Jill pouted, rolling over onto her stomach. Pamper. Her back was still a hell of a thing, and I took my time covering it with lotion with SPF 15. She was pale, and I thought she should use something stronger. But I used what I had. From her neck and shoulders to her dainty ass, I made sure not an inch of skin was left untouched. I gently ran the lotion over her sides, rubbing them thoroughly. She lifted up a little, giving me access. And as I applied the lotion to her firm breasts, my hand slid underneath her. She cried out in surprise. "Careful, kid," my wife reminded me. I lowered myself to her lower back and rested on top of her. I applied more lotion and ran it over her deliciously pale cheeks. Despite her pallor, she had a distinct tan line, and I hesitated to see if I had broken any more boundaries. My favorite wife was still watching me and said grudgingly, "Careful there. It would be a shame if that cute little ass got all sunburned." I massaged her ass like my life depended on it. I moved to the side, leaning on only one leg, and opened her up a little. I didn't want her to get burned and become too sensitive. Jill spread her legs wide, giving me good access, which I took advantage of. "I think that's settled," Sherry said quietly, her breathing shallow. I could swear she was turned on by my actions. "Yeah, and speed up a bit, or I'll burn to the ground before you even get to me, Windrabin." I finished with Jill's legs, working down to the bottom of her feet, working fairly quickly but thoroughly. I turned to Sherry, but she only nodded towards Robin. "Go ahead and take care of her, and I'll let Jill take care of me. Is that okay with you, Jill?" Jill knelt down and held out her open palms to me. "Give me some of your juice, handsome," she said. And ignoring the hint, I splashed some lotion into her hands. I dabbed Robin even more thoroughly than Jill, since Sherry wasn't very observant when applying her lotion. Jill and I ended up working the backsides of both women at the same time. I gave her a little extra lotion, and then quickly applied the lotion to Robin's cheeks, followed by a thorough probing. I teased her as I watched Jill knead Sherry's ass, eliciting quiet moans from her. When I finally got Robin to moan, Sherry, without even looking, barked at me. "Bastard, now get on with her legs and stop teasing the poor thing." There was no anger in her voice, and she took a deep breath. Canceling the game, I finished with Robin's legs and got up to leave. Jill had other ideas, reaching out and running her lotion-slippery palm over me. "Just trying to help you avoid getting burned," she said with a smile. "Robin, how about the other side?" And while Jill saddled my heated wife, she and Robin made sure that the parts of my body normally covered by a swimsuit were protected from the sun's rays. Jill made sure my sensitive skin was especially protected. "Get out of here," she finally growled. Before I get us all in trouble, regretfully stepping over my wife, I ducked toward the shore. At the cabin, Dan was working in the backyard and showed me the work area. Sometime in the past, someone had built a 10 by 12 metal shed across from the main cabin. Dan was offended by its appearance, and over the past summer had added a rough, hewn log facade that blended very well with the exterior of the shack. Inside, under a large panel, and next to a pile of large batteries, was a working generator. Next to it stood 4 canisters of fuel. That and the floor scrubber were the only high-tech gadgets. When I asked for a chainsaw, he only laughed and pointed to a large axe lying off to the side. "We've got everything old school here. Look at the original sharpening stone." He had a sharpening machine powered by a runner that must have been as old as the shack. He sat down at it and gave me a quick lesson in sharpening. He put on pants, but I was still naked as a bird, and when I sat down to sharpen the axe, the spinning sharpening stone so close to my crotch made me as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. After a minute of almost futile effort, he took pity on me and brought the edge of the axe to a shine in a minute. I grabbed my tool, found pants and boots in the garage, and partially dressed. I headed up the road from the cabin, and after a few hundred yards, I realized we were in trouble. The back hillside was soggy, and the road was covered with mud and puddles. A little farther down the road, a large branch crossed the road. I got off the bike and carefully walked around it in the thick woods and undergrowth. Back on the bike, I rode for another 5 minutes before I ran into real trouble. A large tree had been uprooted, the entire root ball was visible, and it was leaning across the trail with the top of the tree tangled in another tree on the opposite side of the trail. The only good news was that there was a bend in the road ahead where it turned into a wider and better maintained gravel road. I had a lot of work to do. Call me a weirdo, but I love physical labor. Maybe it's because my first jobs in high school and college involved hard labor. Now that I spent most of my day at a desk, I like to get outside and get dirty, swinging an axe, trying to cut my way through a tree about 2 feet in diameter, feeling the hard impact, watching pieces of wood fly apart from my precise blows. I loved it all. I enjoyed the feel of the wooden handle in my hands, the flexing of my shoulder muscles, the strain on my back. I worked tirelessly, cutting the wood and chopping it into pieces less than 3 feet long. I was all dirty, stacking logs on the side of the road, and even trimming large branches so I could cut them into more manageable pieces later. My arms and chest were scratched from working with the rough bark on the heavy logs, and my hands looked like hamburger by the end of the job. I don't know how long I did it, but I was surprised to see Jill pull up in her husband's Road King. "Damn it, Alex, you're filthy. What have you been doing the last few hours?" she asked, getting off the bike. She was wearing her surprisingly tight pants and someone else's t-shirt that was too big. I felt like ripping it off her. Instead, I nodded toward the stacks of firewood on the side of the road. "A tree blocked the road," I explained, leaning my axe against my side and wiping my forehead, from which sweat dripped to my eyes. She slowly approached me. "Are you done yet?" "Yes, I think that's quite enough. I was just about to chop some more wood for the fireplace, but I think a rest will do me good." Now that I had stopped working, I could feel the pain in my forearms, shoulders, and back, and my legs were almost shaking. I was overworking, but that was pretty typical for me. Once I started working, I rarely had the common sense to realize when I needed to take a break. Jill walked over to me and ran her hands over my chest and shoulders. "Poor baby, I'm sure you're completely exhausted." She leaned forward and gently kissed one of the more serious scratches. "And your poor skin. You should have been more careful. I just need a break, a little rest, a quick swim, and I can finish the other, smaller branch there before the sun goes down," I said, closing my eyes, enjoying the feel of her hands on my skin. I felt her hands move down to the button of my pants, and her lips traced a path down my stomach. I opened my eyes to look at her. "You've earned your reward," she told me, stroking me with her hand. Pull my pants down. We stood in the dirt, and I offered to step aside. She walked past me, sat down on one of the wooden pyramids I had created, and beckoned me over to her. I stepped toward her, let her pull down my pants, and leaned forward to thank my pantser friend. There was a mischievous light in her eyes. "The girls made me promise to leave your friend here alone," she sighed. "But if you can keep a secret, well, I didn't promise that I wouldn't let you do what you might want to do." She leaned forward and opened her mouth. "You're not the kind of man who takes advantage of a woman, no matter how much she teases you. I know you wouldn't be so mischievous for your own pleasure, would you? I hate to break it to you, beautiful, but that's exactly the kind of varmint I am." I wiped my hands on my pants, removing as much dirt from them as I could. "Oh God," she said pitifully. "Such a strong and virile man, how can I stop you? Please don't do it here, out in the open where any passerby can see you taking advantage of me." She opened her mouth wide and closed her eyes. I smiled and it started. I reached down and put a finger under her chin, forcing her to close her mouth around me. I held her head while her devilish tongue did totally perverted things to me, hidden from view. Her eyes opened and she looked up at me with an expression of helplessness that only made me tense up more. I felt her push back a little, and I started to do it a little faster and harder. She's such a beautiful girl. Big brown eyes that almost match her hair, except for the shades of red. She looked very natural, unpainted lips, fair skin with a scattering of freckles, and a hint of redness where the sun lightened her upper cheeks just below her eyes. Her eyebrows seemed unplucked and almost perfect. I took in every bump, line, and nuance of her face, while my hardcock enjoyed its warm, albeit redundant, journey. The constant teasing and previous games with Robin had me ready to shoot at a moment's notice. That's how it seemed to me as her eyes opened wider and wider, and she just let herself go, letting me do whatever I wanted with her face and mouth. I felt my breath burn, almost as heavy as when I'd cut through the main tree. "I'm coming for you, beautiful," I told her, and she closed her eyes, letting me do what I needed to do. When my breathing slowed, and my movements almost stopped as she took control of herself, sucking me dry and slowly returning some of the hardness to my partner in crime. She lowered her head in mock shame. "Oh, you cruel, wicked man. How can I face my friends again? How can I be in the same room with you, knowing that you have had me before and can do it again if I am alone with you?" I played along. I took her chin and lifted her face. "Lift your head up, slut, you're mine now. Any common skirt like you should be happy. No, proud to be claimed. I will have you again when we are alone, and probably when we are not. You won't deny me anything." When I finally came out of it, she sighed. "God, that was incredible. I felt so helpless while you were using me. You think it's unbelievable. You should try being on my side," I told her, leaning in and kissing her. "If we had more time, I would agree. I'd love to feel your tongue," she sighed, standing up and pulling my face in for another kiss. She looked down at herself and smiled, then put her t-shirt back on. "This is good, really good. I can't wait to accidentally let the girls see it. Why are you doing this? Why such wild intemperance all of a sudden?" I asked, pulling up my pants. "Oh, don't worry. We're teasing all you guys, and your cute little wifey is doing her best." "You must have looked a little stunned. I don't think they get the same treatment as you do," she admitted. "At least I know Dan didn't get anywhere near the enjoyment you got from me, and I suspect from Robin. We're supposed to be just teasing you mercilessly, so that tonight we can each enjoy our men. Thank you very much, with a whole day's worth of restrained lust ready to break free. You girls are really bad, you know," I teased back, leaning in for a kiss again. After a while, she pulled away. "Okay, Fall, I think you're over the limit now." She smiled at me. "Well, admit it. Don't you think it would be great if all three of us as teenagers did it in the same room? You could make love to your poor wife until you passed out, and then look back and see me riding Jack like there's no tomorrow. Doesn't that sound at least mildly amusing? Hell yeah. I just never expected it," I admitted. "Dreamed, yes. Fantasized, yes. But expected, I guess not. But all that bare skin is getting to all of us. But we'd better get back before they start taking an interest in us, and before they get into trouble themselves." She laughed and walked back to the big bike, wiggling her ass as if to call for my attention, which I was so eager to respond to. The sequel follows. Don't forget to subscribe so YouTube will give the new part to you in recommendations.